And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. It's available at Pacifica Radio and iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud. And my guest for this show is Joel Segal. He's been on the forefront on climate change, healthcare, and civil rights. He was the former senior legislative assistant and speechwriter to Representative John Conyers from 2000 to 2013, who was the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Joel was the founder of the 2000 Universal Healthcare Movement and co-authored HR 676, Rep. Conyers ACA, the now heralded expanded and improved Medicare for All bill. And he was a co-founder of Progressive Democrats of America, PDA. It's great to have you on the show.
Happy Saturday, my friend.
And I really abbreviated your bio. You've got an amazing bio here. So it's
Thanks.
a pleasure and an honor to have you with us here.
Me too. Me too.
So you're here for a reason. Why are you here?
To announce a very exciting, I think, historical happening, and that's progressive leaders from across the nation, some of them from around the world, are going to have a National Justice Roundtable. This is an unprecedented attempt to unify the progressive movement in 50 states, 435 congressional districts, and our territories, so we can unite under one progressive united front to tackle very important emergencies of our time. One emergency, of course, is the climate crisis that we all see on television every day, whether it's water shortages out west, fires out west, flooding in Europe, flooding in China, a hurricane category 4 is about to bear down on the Gulf Coast because of climate change, food shortages, voter suppression by the far right wing, a Republican Party who I believe is the most dangerous organization in the world, and voter suppression, poverty, inequality, lack of a safety net for seniors and disabled. We want to begin to address these issues as a force for the people, not wait on our politicians, but we have to come together and agree to be this united front. And we got so many great leaders Monday, August the 30th from 1 to 5. And it's a dream come true. I never thought this would happen.
It's really exciting. Now, the website to find out more about it is https://actionnetwork.org/events/national-justice/roundtable/. And if you're on YouTube, I'll have it in the description. Otherwise, I guess you could probably Google National Justice Roundtable and come up with it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an exciting concept. You're basically bringing all these different grassroots organizations together, and you're saying this is like a first.
Yes, it is. It is because it's multi-issue, but you have very prominent and effective coalitions right now, like the Poor People's Campaign. I think the LGBTQ campaigns are very coordinated, but what we want to do is put all the different progressive organizations and leaders, 50 states, 435 congressional districts, and our territories together, because that way we'll have more solidarity, we'll have more effective coordination, consolidation, because right now, millions of people are about to be evicted from their homes because of COVID-19, and in my opinion, a poorly planned program that came from the HEROES Act, right around $85 billion, which was supposed to have been dispersed to the states and then given to the landlords and tenants so that they wouldn't be evicted. Now they're on the verge of eviction, and the Supreme Court, which is the most, Representative Conyers warned me about the Supreme Court. He said, Joel, they have too much power. I've never seen a Supreme Court this radically conservative. They have too much power. Turns out that Mr. Conyers, as always, was very prescient. The Supreme Court should have never even entered into this fray, saying that the CDC moratorium on evictions, and they overturned it. Now, that's something that Congress should be in charge of, not the Supreme Court. I have a legal background. I've never seen anything like this right-wing Supreme Court. If we don't have a progressive movement that's united with power, well-funded, paid organizers, then the far right wing, which has too much influence in our Supreme Court, our general assemblies, which I call the neo-Confederate secessionist general assemblies, led by governors who believe that wearing a mask is somehow unpatriotic. We got a real problem on our hands. We have growing authoritarianism, voter suppression. If we don't unite as progressives, there's 100 members of the Progressive Caucus right now. That was one of the things that I worked on every day when I was in Congress to try to bolster and strengthen the Progressive Caucus, co-founded the Progressive Democrats of America for the reason of I thought there was a need for progressives to weigh in on Congress more than when I was there. And then the Bernie Sanders campaign, what has happened now, progressives are in our ascendancy. I've never seen us with this much influence and power, but we have to start acting like we got power. But I don't think that we are, and we have to organize differently or we're going to lose humanity and civilization to climate change.
I love that. Progressives are in our ascendancy. And just today, I think it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post, there's an article about how the House of Representatives has to deal with progressives because they got more power than ever before.
It's wonderful because when I was there from 99 to 2013, we just did not have that level of power. And I think groups like Indivisible, Our Revolution, Progressive Democrats of America, the Squad, made it hip for progressives to pay attention to, electoral politics, the Congress, the machinations of the Congress, and actually running, which was what I was hoping would happen when I got involved in the Progressive Democrats of America. At that time, when I was there, it was the Blue Dog Democrats that had the power. So there's been a shift, but we need closer to 170 progressives or even 200. And what's happening is I think the progressive caucus is really right there in the mainstream of America. The Republicans want to say that progressives are communist and socialist. Really? I never met a communist in the Progressive Caucus. And that's kind of McCarthyism 3.0, this kind of red baiting, as opposed to looking at what do progressives stand for? Progress. We stand for progress.
Absolutely. Do Republicans have something like you're trying to put together, a comparable, a counterpart to the National Justice Roundtable and the coalition you're attempting to form?
Yeah, they invented, I think, the idea of deep coalition politics. The right wing came together in the late 70s, raised a lot of money, and they got Ronald Reagan to be their candidate. Then you have the Heritage Foundation, you have Cato Institute, you have Fox News. One of the first things that the right wing did in the 80s is they started buying AM radio stations and taking over the airwaves. I think Rush Limbaugh, probably the most dangerous, influential right-wing commentator that we've ever seen. They have their convention every year that Donald Trump just spoke at, CPAC. We need to have ours. And we can learn a lot from their playbook. And as Representative Alan Grayson told me last week, I said, how do we parse this National Justice Roundtable? And he said, the right wing is united by their greed. We need to be united by what needs we have. And yes, they are very well organized. They know each other. They meet on a regular basis. So we're going to have to counter that.
I think of like Netroots Nation as an example of that.
Yes.
Well, but that's really that they really don't put together a coalition. I think that the coalition is such an important thing that, I wrote a book, Bottom Up Revolution. I wrote a book, The Bottom Up Revolution, and I believe that progressives are in their core nature. It's in their DNA to be bottom up. Well, humans are, really, but we're not doing it. And I really think that we have to bring all these groups together. And it's a real challenge because we just had something happen in Ohio that I don't think people really addressed. And Nina Turner ran, and she was off to a great start and had lots of money, had a lead, and then she lost. And some liberal outlets, and I don't consider liberal progressives, some liberal outlets attacked her and said that she had problems with managing her campaign. But I really believe that what happened was that she basically had a position on Israel, and they spent an enormous amount of money because she was critical of Israel. And she's not the first one that's happened to, and she's not going to be the last one. So I think that one thing that this coalition has to look at is how it's going to handle that. I think that's a real problem. I always say is the Arab-Israel problem is the hardest problem in the world. And in America, there's such an influence there. So is that going to be part of this conversation?
It is. Nina got AIPAC. She got AIPAC. So AIPAC raised two.
Much more brief way to put it than I put it.
Well, you put it exactly right. Now, AIPAC and the Jewish far right organizations happen to be a Jewish progressive, and quite proud of being a Jewish progressive. Shalom Aleichem, brother, and gefilte fish and bagels and lox.
And you're also probably accused of being a self-hating Jew too.
Oh yeah. I hate myself. That's why I study the Torah every morning and talk to my Jewish mommy every morning, and even worship at Orthodox temples when I have time.
Really, Kinahara.
Yeah. I have been studying Judaism very seriously since I'm about 30, and I love studying Jewish history. And whenever I can study with rabbis, I do it. In fact, most of my work is the result of my upbringing as a Jewish activist from the time I was a teenager, because I was really into supporting Israel at that time. And but yeah, in fact, I've been very involved in leadership in this Israel-Palestinian tragic conflict for years. I was the intermediary in a volunteer process between the PLO and the Congress for many, many years.
Wow.
I was. I've never said that publicly, but I might as well just say it publicly. And really believe the PLO and the Palestinian Authority are just completely sincere about peace. I know the far Jewish right doesn't have that opinion because they're making a lot of money by having a permanent boogeyman in the Palestinian people without knowing them, without talking to their leaders, without realizing in 1988 at the Palestinian National it was called the PNC, Palestinian National Committee, in '88 in Tunisia at their conference called for a two-state solution, which means they were recognizing Israel's right to exist. And so I'm involved in a monthly symposium series with people from the Meretz Party, leading Palestinian leaders, and American progressive Jews who are calling on Biden to negotiate a settlement, a permanent status solution, something like the Geneva Accord, or you'd have to look at the 67 borders and the Arab peace plan, because that's what the Israelis and the Palestinians have already negotiated successfully. But the far right wing, both in America and Israel, are making a lot of money by being intransigent about peace and allowing for the settlers to take over land that by international law, 242, is illegal. So as Jewish people, we can't, on the one hand, say that the United Nations legally created Israel, but then say, but Israel doesn't have to follow international law. That's inconsistent. But also, if the Palestinian Authority is providing security to Israel, and Israel is providing security to the Palestinian Authority, why would you need to occupy a government that's providing you with security? You see, that's antithetical to any kind of logic. So yes, we are definitely going to be involved in that space.
And what else? We'll go through the list again. What are the main issues that you're going to be working on Monday between 1 and 5 in the Zoom call for the National Justice Roundtable?
Yeah, we've decided to focus on not every issue, but as many as we can. Election protection, voter suppression, getting out the vote. There are so many organizations who are working on election protection and voter suppression that are doing phenomenal work, but we want to figure out how can we be much powerful force in getting legislation passed, like HR 1 and HR 4, right? For the People Act and the John Lewis voting rights bill. So that's something we want to talk about. How we're going to get out the vote in 2022, especially in the Black community. How do we replicate the Georgia miracle? And we're going to have several speakers talking about how did Georgia get a Jewish guy and an African-American minister in a red state to be their two senators? Well, it's simple. The African-American community organized a grassroots effort of which we've never seen before. We have a book coming out about that and a documentary that they'll be part of that panel. Yeah.
The other thing is you had the help of Donald Trump.
Donald Trump did help because he told everyone that the election was rigged. And apparently a lot of Republicans were like, well, why should we vote in Georgia if it's rigged? But the real victory, according to the New York Times, was the rural Black vote was really determinative. And what 19 NAACPs did and other organizations and the Southwest Georgia Organizing Project, all of them are going to be part of our panel. And Stacey Abrams, of course, they got out the Black vote in numbers of which we've never seen before. That has to happen in all the different swing states. We're also dealing with climate change, green earth, green jobs. We have about 10 years to address climate change. That's it. And we're going to have leaders from Greenpeace to all kinds of folks who work in that space. Then it's going to be ending homelessness and poverty. National Coalition for the Homeless will be moderating that roundtable. And I think we got some of the greatest leaders and every age. It's intersectional, multi-generational. We're going to see a preponderance of communities of color who will be in leadership of this roundtable. And then just justice in the aggregate, because when you wake up in the morning, most progressives don't say, well, I'm only for addressing climate change, not voter suppression, or I'm going to only work on voter suppression, but not ending homelessness. We all care about these issues because they're issues of justice. So we're going to work together.
That's it. Back in 2003, 2004, 2005, I wrote a series of articles about how the left needs what the right has. Organizations that are advocacy organizations. They're not just think tanks. The left has think tanks, but the right has think tanks that are organizations that invest an enormous amount in advocacy, creating all kinds of radio and TV show guests, funding people who need a job, who are in between politics. And we don't have anything like that. We have Center for American Progress, which is bogus. To me, when they came out with that, all the money went to that. They got 10 million or $20 million. And John Podesta, Hillary's guy, was running it. It's not a progressive place. They did a little bit of talk, but they didn't do the walk. We did, up until Obama, have an annual progressive media event that Debbie Stabenow's office put together in the Senate. I don't know if you were aware of that.
Yes, boy, you're really spot on. I remember I asked Ralph Nader, why does the right wing have unity and why don't progressives? And he said, well, they want it more than we do. If Martin Luther King, we're celebrating the I Have a Dream speech this weekend. There's thousands of people at the Lincoln Memorial on the Mall celebrating King. You celebrate King, think about, well, what would King do now if he saw voter suppression, a Republican Party that has adopted authoritarianism as its guiding ideology? What would he do if he saw the world could end in 10 years? Martin King would unify all the progressive groups and people who are progressives under one umbrella. I'm sure that's what he would do. When I worked for John Conyers from 1999 to 2013, he had pictures of King everywhere. Apparently, John Conyers was one of Martin King's, favorite activist. And Martin King campaigned for John Conyers when he was running for Congress in the early 60s, because Rosa Parks, who had worked for Conyers, asked Martin King.
Really? Oh,
Yeah, that's the
awesome.
story. And Conyers won by 336 votes, I think. And he used to tell me the story, but he knew King very well, and Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, that all came from King. That's the kind of spirit that I believe we'll be unifying under, and that's a beloved community. We all work together. We have no choice but to work together. Who else are we going to work with if we don't work with progressives?
Yeah. And it's been a joke about, progressives being like cats trying to organize them, but we need to do it. And
we've done it.
We've done it.
I would say, well, when I say we've done it, we've got the National Organization of Women, National Latino Farmers and Trade Association. We have so many major organizations across the country who've agreed that we're going to unify Monday, August the 30th, because they realize that we don't have the on-the-ground power to do mass mobilizations, whether it's in the streets or the suites, unless we unify. People are scared of climate change. They're afraid of the right-wing direction of this country. They're afraid of the comfortable class that's represented in our General Assemblies, Congress, the Supreme Court, that they don't care about the people. We can't leave climate change to the politicians. We have to have way more contact with our elected officials. We don't have enough contact with them. We can't do that without a higher level of coordination and more solidarity, more bonding. But it's going to take time to unify the progressive movement, but we're going to find those who want to work in coalition. That is the particular wing of the National Justice Roundtable, is a coalition wing. Not everybody believes in that, and that's cool. That's okay. But for those who do, we say join us. Join us.
How can you not believe it? Well, you know what? We need to take a break for OID. When we come back, we're going to talk about how anybody would not think that the coalition is a good idea. So 30 seconds now.
How long is the break for?
30 seconds.
All right, I'll be right back.
And my guest for the show is Joel Siegel. He's the former senior legislative assistant and speechwriter to Rep. John Conyers from 2000 to 2013. Conyers was the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. And Joel was the founder of the 2000 Universal Healthcare Movement and co-authored HR 676, Rep. Conyers ACA, the now heralded, expanded, and improved Medicare for all. So why would a progressive organization not want to be a part of this coalition?
So far they are. Everyone who's got progressive coalitions are so excited because they realize that you can't have enough coalitions, right? And the National Justice Roundtable is not claiming to be the leader of the progressive movement, but we want to be a catalyst to unite progressives across the country and in our territories and even in other countries, because in order to save our planet from climate change, we have to transition to 100% clean renewable energy in every energy sector in the next 10 years, about 80%, as rapidly as possible. We don't do that, and the temperature of the world goes from if our temperature rises 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2.0 centigrade, climate change is irreversible. We have enough time to cool down the planet, get the environment back to an ecosystem to homeostasis. You can't do a transition unless you do it in India, China, all the G8 countries and developing countries, which is going to take planning from so many leaders. So we are going to have a global justice roundtable. Now, people might think, boy, that's overly ambitious. It is not overly ambitious if we're going to survive. Lastly, when I worked for Conyers, I was very fortunate to work with Congresswoman Barbara Lee and the Black Caucus. I asked Bono of U2 to lead the effort on global HIV/AIDS. We held a conference in DC with leaders from Africa, Caribbean, all over the world. Conyers and I organized about 20 congressional briefings. And George W. Bush prayed with Bono in the White House, and we got PEPFAR, $15 billion a year to address the shortage of antiretroviral AIDS drugs in Africa and the Caribbean. Now, I've already done this before. So this isn't something to me that's new and exotic. In 1999, I led the effort to launch the universal healthcare effort with Bernie Sanders on the steps of the Capitol. 1,000 uninsured people with Bernie. I made a speech. That's how I got into Conyers' office. I spent 9 years with John Conyers traveling the country, city after city, town after town, to unify the universal healthcare movement. There were two tributaries. One was universal healthcare, which came basically that created Obamacare, and then single payer Medicare for all. Now, the single payer movement had about 500 organizations. The ACA movement had over 1,000. We had so much power and unity and coordination and funding. We told the Democratic Party what we wanted, and we got what we wanted. Not everything. We didn't get Medicare for all, but we got 20 million people covered, which, that was the movement did that. That was a progressive movement victory, of which I'm writing a book about, to chronicle what happened with Obama, who I loved. He didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to do universal health care. We pushed him to do it when Kucinich ran for president on Medicare for all, HR 676, the bill that I co-authored. And so—
God bless Dennis.
He's running for mayor of Cleveland, and I love him, man. And we're going to have Representative Alan Grayson, by the way, will be on the panel as well. So, this is not that hard. You just got to get organized, leave your ego at the door, have fun, be a family, bring in some music, but you cannot have an ego. I'm a Buddhist and I'm a Buju. You can't do this because you want to get known. I mean, I'm a professional musician. I'm a bass player. That's my other career. When I'm around musicians, we don't walk around talking about how great we are in our instruments. We're trying to play the music in a band. And we play together. I come from that tradition of being a musician, and we've got so many great leaders out here. We got a lot of young people who will be on the roundtable too, dynamic young leaders. So we're going to highlight them.
I literally tried to do this locally in the Philadelphia area about 10 or 12 years ago. I mean, I literally said to different organizations, we need to build a coalition to work together. And we had one meeting, and I was not able to do it. So I give you a lot of credit for just getting as far as you have already.
Thank you.
But the organizations were asking, what's in it for us? Why should we do this? Why should we give up control? Why should we give up our power to a larger coalition?
Yeah, first of all, I love your book, The Bottom-Up Revolution, of which I'm going to order on Amazon. I think it's brilliant, by the way. I work with a guy named Chuck Pinocchio in Philadelphia.
Chuck's a good friend.
Well, he's been talking about this for years. I also work with a Dr. Walter Sue.
I know Walt too.
This is small.
Yeah.
Dr. Walter Sue is who we brought in for all the briefings and hearings we did on Medicare for All, which will pass one day. But I hope, Rob, that you can be one of our key leaders. We are working with the Progressive Magazine. Norman Stockwell is one of the speakers at our roundtable. We have if I had met you before, I'd ask you to be on one of the panels. And from 5 to 6, we're going to have a very open discussion with other leaders. I'd invite you to be the first person to open it up, that I think we're going to need to call on, so you can explain what you're doing. I have to tell you, I'm getting calls from all across the country, from people I've never met who are like, how do we join this National Justice Roundtable? I want to be a part of this too. We want to provide a home for progressives in 50 states. I mean, look at all the people. I just finished Our Revolution by Bernie Sanders. He was getting 10 to 15,000, 20,000 people at his rallies, no matter where he went. for a long period of time, he was the presumptive presidential nominee. And if it hadn't been for the voters of South Carolina, he would have been the nominee. Now, all those people, they go back home after a Bernie rally, and what do? They either go back to their silos or they read Noam Chomsky. Wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't it make sense to read Noam Chomsky and then join a progressive coalition that's in 50 states and in your respective city? It's time to change the country. There's an old America that I think is worn out. People are tired of the inequality, the disparities in income. 7 million people homeless, 78 million people still uninsured, underinsured. Senior citizens like some of my family members that cannot live off $1,000 a month in social insecurity checks. People can't get SSDI because we basically, let's be honest now, we basically have had very wealthy white men who are in charge of the Congress and the federal government promulgating and passing laws to benefit themselves. And we can't sustain our nation like that anymore. Let's do what's best for the 99%. And one thing that we really are advocating for is civility, radical hospitality. Everything is peaceful. Most of our efforts will be around passing legislation or stopping very, very harmful legislation on the federal level and the state level as well.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. So,
thank you.
What's this structure that this is going to be built with? Is there a way? Now, I gave a URL for Action Network for the National Justice Roundtable, but Google, what we're talking about is an event that's happening on Monday, August 30th, from 1 to 5 Eastern time, and then it's going to go on a little bit longer for discussion. And it's bringing together 40, is it 40, did I see? 40 leaders in different progressive movements with the goal of creating a coalition where all the power is put together, where the organizations work together to make things happen.
You just said it so beautifully. I got to remember what you just said. It's very, very succinct, very concise. That's correct. Well, now those are the speakers. That doesn't count all the organizations and leaders across the country who unfortunately we're not going to speak at this roundtable, but will speak at our subsequent roundtables.
Well, if somebody's hearing this and they want to go to it, then they should just Google National Justice Roundtable and they'll find the link to it that is listed at actionnetwork.org. But what if they want to contact somebody? What if they want to get involved? What if they're a leader or a liaison for an organization that hasn't been touched yet? I mean, there are probably thousands of them across the country altogether. How do they get in touch with somebody to get involved?
Hey, look, I'm from the South, I'm laid back. They call me directly, Joel Siegel, 571-344-1518. 571-344-1518. They can email me directly, joel.r.siegel, SEGAL, @gmail.com. I can't keep up with all the texts that I'm getting, phone calls, emails. This is a great idea. I've been thinking the same thing. Well, it would make sense for progressives to have thought this because we're all over the place, but we're losing to the far right. And they are not in the majority of this country. In fact, if you look at the John Lewis voting rights bill, got 78% support. You look at even support of Biden's policy, the same kind of numbers. So if Biden won by 7 million votes, Hillary, I think, won by 6 million votes, both elected by the majorities, then how can we be in the minority? That's antithetical to logic and even empirical data. We just got to organize ourselves and understand our power. The universal healthcare movement and the civil rights movement, we weren't mass movements, but we had enough critical mass, as Congressman Conyers used to say, to pass legislation that had never been passed before.
But what is the right doing that is making them so successful that we're not doing that we should be doing?
One word, solidarity. That's it. They have solidarity. They believe in a particular ideology. Don't tax the rich. Climate change is not real. You have your anti-vaxxer movement. Then you have a wing of the Republican Party, which is now a dominant wing, the Trump wing. The only way you can win an election is by stealing it. They're against private insurance being expanded to people. They're against the ACA. They were against insuring people. They tried to stop the bill for years. Now,
they're against government.
What's that?
They're against government.
Well, they're the only party in the world, that political party that's against the government, because the federal government, which helps them so much with their paved streets, their clean drinking water, police, fire, military, libraries, public schools. Really? You really hate that? Well, the majority of the American people don't hate those services. They're being manipulated by the great manipulatocracy, Fox News and right-wing AM radio. Thank God, Rob, for your show, because you can help reduce the influence of the far right wing, because what they do is what Joseph Goebbels did and Heinrich Himmler in Germany: lie, repeat it over and over again, and people will believe it. Now, that's very, very dangerous. That's dangerous. When I saw January the 6th on the Capitol, the place that I used to work and love, I felt like it was Kristallnacht in Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. And the authoritarian right wing is a very powerful, well-funded movement. And we have to push back against their modern Jim Crow. What George Wallace and David Duke could not succeed at, the right wing is doing it. And that's, stealing elections and passing laws where I call it the pizza law. In Atlanta and Georgia, it's against the law to serve water and pizza in a voting line. They're cutting early voting in the Black community. They know exactly what they're doing. And that's a Machiavellian win at all cost strategy. Make sure that Blacks and students, Latinos and Native Americans reduce their vote, intimidate them, and you can win your election. Now, that's all they care about.
How's it looking, this John Lewis Voting Rights Act? And that's what's needed to counter these laws, these local state laws.
Well, what John Lewis Voting Rights Act does is it strengthens what was the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which was gutted by Shelby versus Holder, which was a horrible decision by Judge Roberts, which said that if a state is going to pass a law that's going to adversely impact minorities, especially Black people, then you have to pre-clear it through the Department of Justice. That got gutted in Shelby versus Holder. So the Shelby case was the Congress has to figure out a new formula to reinstate the voting rights pre-clearance section. Now, it was a disastrous decision as soon as it was passed, because Roberts said we wouldn't have racism anymore in the South. Everything's just fine. There were laws that were passed across General Assemblies across the nation, restricting Black people's right to vote. And when you see thousands and thousands and thousands of people at the mall right now demanding passage of the John Lewis Act, then maybe we have a problem here, okay? There's still too many people, even Democrats, who are like, no, the Republicans mean well, they're trying to stop fraud. I'm like, there was never fraud to begin with, right? It's
right.
It was that's the big lie. So here's going to be the challenge. There was not one Republican in the House that just voted on the John Lewis bill, just to restore the 65 Voting Rights Act. Now, there's going to be no support either in the Senate. Now, what does that mean empirically? It means the Republican Party is a party that's against voting.
So it comes down to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Are they going to support it?
Yes.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Well, if they don't do it, then progressives and the Democrats are dead.
Well, that's the other reason why people across the country are uniting, because we realize that two Democrats cannot strangle or, hijack the Democratic Party and the progressives who are in it for whatever reason. And if our movement's going to be successful, we have to eliminate the Jim Crow racist filibuster. It's not in the Constitution. People who are listening to your show should read Kill Switch, which explains the history of the filibuster. The history of the filibuster is real simple. Whenever legislation was introduced in the 60s, or even now, that's going to impact the Black community in terms of, more rights, then the filibuster is used to kill those bills. Or even after the Parkland massacre, there was a bill introduced in the House and Senate on background checks and I think reducing the clip size of a rifle or gun. They lost that bill because of the filibuster. It's not in the Constitution. Filibuster is not used in state or local government. It's just used by the right wing to stop progress. We got to get rid of it. We have to reform the Electoral College. Why do we have a system? We don't have a democracy. We have an electoral democracy. Why do we have a system where the majority vote doesn't count for president? That doesn't make any sense. So a dictator or a right-wing fascist authoritarian like Donald Trump, I'd like to go toe-to-toe with anyone who says that he's not a fascist authoritarian. That's what he is. And with the Electoral College in existence, a fascist authoritarian can get elected in this country again, like DeSantis or Abbott, governors of Texas and Florida. So we got to get rid of the Electoral College. That's going to take more than 10 nonprofit organizations who are organizing, doing great work. They're not going to have that reach. If we're going to eliminate gerrymandering and reform it so that you have civil society task force, that's going to take a movement, not a moment. Same thing with climate change, every issue. We're not going to win unless we unite. And thank God people are agreeing that, it's time. It's time. We've been a long time coming.
So, you mentioned a number of groups. Is Move On or DFA also, are they involved?
I hope that they will. Be honest with you, we have not had that kind of reach, but we're going to do subsequent roundtables. I love Move On. I've worked with them for years, and Indivisible is going to be involved. But we're going to need Move On because near the end of the Obamacare debate, Rahm Emanuel, who was then the senior advisor, chief of staff to, he's a colleague, friend of mine.
Is he really?
Yes. And
don't like him. He progressives. He hates progressives. Tell me I'm wrong.
He's a very complicated person. I'd be honest with you, I don't know Rahm that well. There's a progressive side in him, but his actions and his records speak volumes, right? So all I can tell you is that Rahm, and I know this because I had interns throughout the White House and throughout Senate office and congressional office when we were working on universal health care. Rahm Emanuel was fearful that Obamacare would translate into House Democrats losing their seats. And he tried to convince Obama to introduce a CHIP bill, expand CHIP, the insurance program for kids. And when I found that out, I called every leader across the country. I said, you got to demonstrate, just demonstrate wherever you are. I called Ed Schultz from MSNBC, the great Ed Schultz. I brought him into the Hill to interview uninsured people who in a series of roundtables that we're doing to show on TV what it was like being uninsured. And then we got in contact with moveon.org. And my idea was to have a million call-in march. Moveon.org got 1 million people to fax, email, and call the White House demanding that we pass the Affordable Care Act. I know their greatness. They are one phenomenal organization, and I hope that they will be part of our National Justice Roundtable. But it's going to take some time. We need more fundraising too, so we can have more capacity to get to get more outreach.
The reason I thought of Move On is they've really built some powerful tools for building bottom-up energy and power, and I think this needs that desperately. You got to have a way for everybody to sign in, sign up, connect. I mean, and that's pretty. That's boilerplate technology anymore with elections the way they are.
They're the best. I mean, Move On has mastered grassroots. Sorry about that. Grassroots lobbying, and But if you think about it, we have to have every single progressive organization, nonprofit, NGO, elected official, students, small businesses, entertainers. There's more of us than we know of. But if you have 100 members of Congress who are now part of the Progressive Caucus, they only got elected because their constituents voted them in, right? AOC being voted in was no mistake. It's because this country is moving towards progressivism, because I think Bernie Sanders explained to people what that meant.
Well, I hope, I just keep going back to Nina Turner, because, she had that almost stolen from her, really. And I really hope that there's a place for her in all this too. Maybe that's, like I said, what the right wing does is it takes its leaders, its great thinkers, and it gives them work. It gives them employment through these think tanks and what have you. And we need to do that too. And, the first person I'm going to think of is Nina Turner. Dennis Kucinich is another one, really.
Yeah.
Alan Grayson. Kucinich got gerrymandered out of his job originally. And then you've got the AIPACization. How did you put it? She was AIPAC.
Well, they got AIPAC. I met Nina Turner at the founding of the Democratic National Committee Poverty Council. She was so wonderful and warm. I think what happened to her is she was leading in fundraising, and a lot of the money that she raised went into commercials. They did not anticipate a surge in money from her opponent, but also they anticipated more online fundraising. It's very hard. Jeff Weaver was he's a friend of mine, the Our Revolution leader.
And he was one of the campaign managers for Bernie. And an old friend of Bernie.
He's a great guy. I worked with him on the Hill for years. He was a genius, funny, brilliant guy, wonderful man.
I've had him on my show.
Yeah, he's terrific. And I got mad respect for that guy. I loved working with him. And Nina, I think we have to do like a analysis of what happened. So what the corporate Democrats are doing, I wish I could, maybe I'll use another word, moderate Democrats. They are basically saying Nina Turner's defeat means that her constituents want a more of like a Biden type of a Democrat, a moderate Democrat. That's not what happened.
Wait, now we got to stop and do another show ID. When we come back, we're going to explain what it really is about. Okay.
Okay.
So a 30-second break. And
Sure. Thank you. Sorry about that. The phone there. Thank you.
My guest for this show is Joel Siegel. He's been on the forefront of the climate change, healthcare, and civil rights activism. He's the former senior legislative assistant to Congressman John Conyers from 2000 to 2013. He was a senior technical consultant for Michael Moore's healthcare documentary SICKO. He helped write HR 676, which was one of the original Medicare For All programs that was in Congress. So you're saying that these centrist corporate Democrats are blaming progressive values on Nina Turner's failures. They did that during the election in 2020 as well. The ones who lost, they blamed it on progressives. What's your response to that?
They're wrong. I think almost every progressive who ran for re-election won, but most Americans want access to affordable health care. They want preschool and childcare. They want the very wealthy to pay their fair share of taxes. They want their kids to be able to go to good public schools and be able to go to college. They want affordable childcare. They want a safety net for their parents or their family members who get ill. They want a clean environment. They want 100% cleanable energy. They want prison reform. They want safe streets. They want to eliminate ghettos and poverty. Now, that's not radical. That's just basic values of ethics and morals, of which most people are for. What the right wing has done quite successfully, well, they haven't completely succeeded because we progressives are still very much alive. They're trying to demonize us because it's in the best interest of the very super wealthy who control the right wing because they don't want to pay more in taxes. You know, they're gonna try to demonize us because they're desperate, because they're losing power. They're losing seats in Congress. They're losing seats in General Assembly, city councils. Corporate America is getting more progressive, and this is an inexorable force that it's not going away. Nina Turner's not going away. Nina Turner will get elected to office one day. But progressive values, I mean, we were founded on progressive values. Not completely. The founding framers, didn't believe that Black people were even fully human and women were not allowed to vote. Fast forward to 2021 and look at all the elections progressives are winning. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. I've never seen so many young people and Americans on the streets demanding justice and police reform. And it just goes to show you that there's been a real sea change in our country where I think apathy is being replaced by an energized citizenry working in the streets and the street. And I'm hoping this roundtable is going to, amplify the progressive movement, but we're starting a foundation to fund local organizers who want to do, for example, GOTV campaigns in the Black communities, because the Democratic Party does not fund community get out the vote campaigns in the Black community. They have to raise money on their own. Is a very, very flawed strategy. You win elections by relational organizing. Now that's going to be talked about at our roundtable by the leaders of the Georgia, what we call the Georgia Miracle.
I need to ask you something. You mentioned South Carolina, because South Carolina is what basically took the candidacy away from Bernie Sanders. And it was James Clyburn who did it. Now, I look at him as an enemy of progressives. Am I wrong? What's the story with this guy? To me, this guy is one of the worst things out there for progressive values, for progressives, period. What's your take on him?
So I worked with Clyburn for many years. I worked with Nancy Pelosi for many years. Now, I may not be right in alignment with Clyburn, but really Clyburn was sort of the instigator who appealed to the Black community and said, we got to get behind Biden because Biden can probably win. Now, we don't know who would have won because Bernie never was in the final election. But what we do know is that there are plenty of progressives in South Carolina, but a lot of these progressive Black leaders will call me to ask me, can I help raise money for their GOTV campaigns? I don't have that much money. I have access to some people who do have it, but I don't have it. And that shouldn't be the case. If you're a Black community leader or minister, there should be millions and millions and millions of dollars given to community organizers because they determine elections. They always have, and they always will, because the Black vote is the true swing vote. Most elections are only won by 1 or 2% margins. It's usually Blacks and students that determine that margin. So it only makes sense to fund Black community leaders because they are winning our elections. And I hope that this roundtable can impact, wherever money goes. We're nonpartisan, by the way. But we can't ill afford to have radical right-wing extremist Republicans in our Congress, or even Democrats who are, corporate type Democrats or blue dog Democrats, because how we organize right now and who we vote for determines whether or not we can pass climate legislation that'll get us to 100% clean renewable energy, also, rapidly, but also resiliency. You can't get that passed. I know I worked in Congress most of my career. If you have members of Congress who do not believe that climate change is real, if you have members of Congress who are too concerned about their coal and oil and gas jobs, which could easily be replaced by clean renewable energy jobs, probably thousands more in their district, who don't care whether or not humanity survives. And we can't afford to have these people in office. Now, progressives are used to the luxury of being in a silo, or working within their own boards for a lot of different reasons. We can't do that anymore. We're going to have to organize very differently or we will not survive. It's just that simple.
Are there any currently elected members of Congress who are going to be participating in the National Justice Roundtable?
They will in subsequent roundtables. We decided that this roundtable, it would just be progressive leaders. That was a decision made by the steering committee, but we have, Representative Alan Grayson is one of our keynotes, but the answer is absolutely, because one of the things I saw in Congress were members of Congress who had the most incredibly progressive bills that I'd ever read, but nobody knew about them. Now, John Conyers had a Martin Luther King strategy with his bills.
You didn't mention that he actually worked really hard for a long time to get Martin Luther King Day passed.
I think it was 13 or 15 years. And when I was getting discouraged about universal healthcare legislation, he said, Siegel, it took me 13, 15 years to pass the Martin Luther King holiday bill. You got to be patient, just keep organizing. It was Ronald Reagan who passed that bill. And that is clear and convincing evidence that you got to keep pushing if you know that something is right. Now, can you imagine working on a Martin Luther King holiday bill for 15 years and he couldn't get it passed out of a committee? Well, it makes sense then why we can't get voting protection bills passed. It's that same, I think, sadistic, sick mentality where you don't care whether or not Black people can vote. Now, the holiday should have been done immediately after Conyers introduced it. What he told me was he called Coretta Scott King the day after the assassination and said, I'm introducing a bill to get the Martin Luther King holiday passed. And I think he hired Donna Brazil to work on that movement. He hired me because he knew I was a community organizer, a national organizer to do single payer and universal health care. And that was the fun part of my job. I had to do the organizing on my lunch breaks because you're not allowed to organize from Capitol Hill. Wow. The legislation I could do, but any kind of organizing I had to do at night or on my
we've only got a minute or two left. There used to be a progressive media conference that was held by Congress. Well, why isn't that happening now? Why didn't it happen under Obama? It stopped under Obama. The last one was the day after of his inauguration.
I think two things happened to answer that question. One, progressives were like, we worked so hard to get Obama elected. I got to take a break, go back to my work. But that's not how it ought to be. When he got elected, that's when progressives should have went even further in terms of organizing and strategic coordination. Number two, there really has been an inherent problem where a lot of progressive organizations who are concerned about foundation grants. There is a foundation nonprofit industrial complex. I just want to be honest. A lot of times these groups are under so much pressure to raise money so they can have a job, but they can't really focus beyond survival. But they are now,
why are things different now so that they can?
I think that they're fearful of climate change because what they see on TV is scaring everybody. That's the fires out west, the drought out west, floods in Europe and China, the possibility that the Antarctic ice shelf is going to melt, that permafrost in Antarctica is going to release methane.
We got a long list here. We got to wrap now. Final words.
They're afraid. Everyone's afraid. They're coming together. They're scared of the future.
So we're talking about the National Justice Roundtable that's happening Monday, August 28th. But this is just the beginning. This is a really exciting beginning. Google National Justice Roundtable. The details are at actionnetwork.org, but it's a long URL. I'm not going to leave it. And you're doing a great job. My guest for this show has been Joel Siegel, former senior legislative assistant and speechwriter for Rep. John Conyers. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Rob. I'm honored to be on your show. You're excellent. I've been on shows for decades like this, but I've never been on a show like yours. But we're going to need you to also help the progressive movement in a leadership role to help us with our press strategy and how do you create a bottom-up revolution? You've already written a book about it. So there are a lot of lessons learned we can learn from you?
I would be happy to supply copies of the book to a lot of those leaders too.
I'll be happy to distribute them.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Go Sixers.